The cafe was small and always smelled of cheap coffee and fried oil. It sat on a busy street where people rushed past without looking inside. Most customers only came because the prices were low and the food was filling. The girl worked there every day from early morning until late at night. She wore the same faded uniform, washed so many times that the color had almost disappeared. Her shoes were old and the soles were thin, but she walked carefully so no one would notice. She was not lazy. She was not slow. She worked harder than anyone else in that place. She cleaned tables, took orders, carried heavy trays, and smiled even when her feet burned with pain. Her smile was not fake, but it was tired. Life had taught her to smile even when she felt empty inside. She lived in a tiny rented room not far from the cafe. The room had one window that barely opened, and walls that were cracked and damp. At night, the noise from the street never stopped. Still, she was grateful for it because it was all she could afford.
Oh.
Every month after paying rent, there was barely enough left for food, transport, and medicine for someone she loved deeply. That someone was the reason she never complained. She had learned long ago that complaining did not bring food to the table, only work did. At the cafe, most customers treated her like she was invisible. Some snapped their fingers to call her. Some spoke to her without looking at her face. A few were kind, but kindness was rare and often rushed. She never expected respect. She only hoped the day would end without trouble. That evening started like any other. The cafe was crowded and noisy. Plates clattered, chairs scraped against the floor, and voices mixed together in a loud mess. She moved quickly between tables, balancing trays with care. Sweat formed on her forehead, but she wiped it away and kept going. Then the door opened. A group of well-dressed people walked in. They did not look like the usual customers. Their clothes were expensive, clean, and sharp. Their watches shined under the cafe lights. The man leading them walked with confidence, as if he owned every place he entered. His laughter was loud and careless. The girl noticed them immediately, not because she wanted to, but because everyone did. Conversations slowed for a moment. Some customers stared. Others looked away, embarrassed by the difference between the rich group and the poor place they had chosen to enter. The manager rushed forward, suddenly polite and nervous, showed them the best table and wiped it twice. Even though it was already clean, the girl was sent to serve them. She took a deep breath before walking over. Rich customers often meant trouble. They expected perfect service. They did not hide their disappointment if they felt bored. She greeted them softly and asked for their order. Her voice was calm, but her hands shook slightly as she held the notepad. The rich man looked at her from head to toe. His eyes stopped at her shoes, then her uniform, then her face. A small smile formed on his lips. It was not a kind smile. "So this is the service here," he said loudly, making sure his friends heard him. "Interesting." They laughed. The girl lowered her eyes and waited. She had heard worse before. Words could hurt, but silence helped her survive. He ordered expensive items that were not even on the menu, then laughed again when she politely explained what the cafe actually served. His friends joined in, enjoying the moment. She wrote down the order and turned to leave. But his voice stopped her. "Wait," he said. "How much do you make here?" The question was sharp and sudden. The cafe went quieter. Some nearby customers listened closely. The girl hesitated. Talking about money was never comfortable. "It depends on the day," she said softly. He smiled wider. "Let me guess. Barely enough, right?" More laughter. She felt her face grow warm. Still, she said nothing. He continued, pulling out his wallet. "Some people work their whole lives and still stay poor." He placed a few bills on the table, not even looking at them. The amount was small to him, but to her, it could buy food for days. Her eyes fell on the money for just a second. Just 1 second. Then she looked away. His friend leaned back and said, "Hey," she noticed it. The rich man laughed again. Of course she did. "Money speaks louder than respect, doesn't it?" The words hit her harder than a slap. She picked up the order and walked away, her chest tight. In the kitchen, she paused, gripping the counter until her hands stopped shaking. She told herself to breathe. She told herself it was just another table, just another night, but it was not. As she served other customers, she could feel his eyes on her. Every time she passed their table, another comment followed. Joke about her uniform, a remark about her accent, a laugh about how small her world must be. Some people laughed along, others stayed silent, staring at their plates. She kept working. Inside, memories rose like waves. Long nights studying under dim lights. How dreams she once had before life forced her to choose survival over hope. Promises she made to herself to never beg, never break, no matter how low she fell. She had not fallen because she was weak. She had fallen because life pushed her when she brought their food. The rich man clapped slowly. Look at that. She didn't spill it. Impressive. His friends laughed again. Her fingers tightened around the tray. For a moment she wanted to speak. She wanted to tell him that her life was worth more than his jokes, that her silence was not weakness. But she remembered the empty room she would return to that night. She remembered the medicine bottle that was almost empty. So she stayed quiet. The rich man leaned closer as she placed the plates down. Smile, he said. At least pretend you're happy. She forced a small smile. It hurt more than the insults. As she turned away, he added loudly, See? Poor people are always grateful. The words followed her like a shadow. The rest of the cafe felt heavier after that. The air was thick with discomfort. Even the noise seemed forced now. She finished her shift with aching legs and a tired heart. When the group finally stood up to leave, the rich man tossed the bills onto the table. For your hard work, he said. The money slid slightly and stopped near the edge. She looked at it for a long moment. She did not move. Then she picked it up, not because she wanted to, but because she needed to. The rich man smirked as he walked out. No one stopped him. No one said a word. The girl stood there, holding the money, feeling smaller than ever. But deep inside her chest, something else stirred. Not anger, not hate. Resolve she did not know it yet, but that night was only the beginning. What he saw as entertainment would become the reason her life would slowly change. And one day, she would no longer stay silent. That night after the cafe finally closed, the girl stayed back to clean. The manager had already left, and the other workers rushed out as soon as their shift ended. No one liked staying late. The lights felt harsher when the place was empty, and the silence made tired thoughts louder. She wiped tables slowly, replaying the evening in her mind. The rich man's laughter, the way people looked away, the money lying on the table like it was bait. She kept telling herself it was over, that tomorrow would be another long day, just like all the others. When she finished cleaning, she locked the door and stepped outside. The air was cool, and the street was still busy. She counted the money. In her hand again, even though she already knew how much it was. It was enough to buy food and refill the medicine she needed to get in the morning. She felt ashamed for feeling relieved as she walked home. She passed bright shops with glass windows and expensive displays. She saw her reflection in one of them. A tired girl with pulled-back hair, a worn bag on her shoulder, and eyes that had seen too much too soon. She looked away and kept walking. Her room greeted her with its usual smell of damp walls and old paint. She placed the money carefully inside a small box under her bed. That box held everything important in her life. A few savings, some papers, a notebook she rarely opened anymore. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally let her shoulders drop. The silence felt heavy, but also safe. No laughter, no eyes watching. Sleep did not come easily. The next morning she woke before the alarm. Her body ached, but she forced herself up. She washed her face with cold water and tied her hair back neatly. Before leaving, she opened the small box and took out the notebook. It was old and slightly torn. Inside were notes written years ago, plans, ideas, things she once believed were possible. She ran her fingers over the pages and closed it again. Not now, she thought. Maybe one day at the cafe, the day began quietly. Morning customers came for cheap tea and bread. Some nodded at her. Some didn't notice her at all. She worked as usual, moving between tables, keeping her head down. But the memory of the night before stayed with her. Every laugh she heard felt sharper. Every rude comment felt heavier. By afternoon, the cafe filled again. That was when she saw him. The same rich man walked in alone this time. His suit was crisp, and his phone rested in his hand like it was part of him. He looked around with the same confident expression as if the place belonged to him. Her heart dropped. She considered hiding in the kitchen, but the manager noticed him and immediately sent her over. She approached the table slowly. He looked up and smiled. "Looks like we meet again," he said. She nodded politely and asked for his order. He leaned back in his chair. "Relax. I'm not here with friends today. No audience." That did not make her feel better. He ordered coffee and watched her as she wrote it down. His eyes were calm, curious, like she was something new he wanted to understand. "You were very quiet yesterday," he said casually. She did not respond. "I like quiet people," he continued. "They usually have no choice." She felt a familiar tightness in her chest. Still, she stayed silent. When she brought his coffee, he placed a coin on the table and pushed it toward her. "For good service," he said. The coin was small. Almost insulting, she did not take it. He raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she said softly. "I'm just doing my job." He studied her for a moment. Something about her calm response seemed to bother him. "You should learn to speak up," he said. "The world eats people like you." She wanted to tell him the world had already tried, but she did not. Later that day after he left, one of the regular customers stopped her. An older woman who came every afternoon for tea. "You didn't deserve that," the woman said quietly. The girl smiled weakly. "It's okay." The woman shook her head. "No, it's not." Those words stayed with her. That evening, after work, she stopped at the small pharmacy near her room. She bought the medicine she needed and felt relief when the pharmacist handed it to her. On the way back, she noticed a notice board near the bus stop. Papers were pinned to it, most of them old and torn. One paper caught her eye. It was about a small skills program starting soon. Evening classes. Low cost. She stood there for a long time, reading it again and again. At home, she opened her notebook that night. This time, she did not close it. She began writing again. Days passed. The cafe stayed busy. The rich man returned a few more times, sometimes alone, sometimes with others. His comments never crossed into shouting, but they were sharp enough to leave marks. Each time, she answered less with silence and more with calm control. Not rude, not weak. Just steady, he noticed one afternoon. He said, "You've changed." She looked at him. "People do," he smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. At night, she attended the classes. She sat in the back, listening carefully, learning things she once loved. Her mind slowly woke up again. She stopped seeing herself only as a waitress. One evening, as she left class, she saw the rich man outside talking on his phone. He noticed her and looked surprised. "You study?" he asked after ending the call. "Yes," she said simply. He laughed softly. "Interesting." She walked past him without waiting for approval. Inside her, something grew stronger each day. Not confidence, exactly. More like balance. She still worked long hours. She was still tired. But she was no longer empty. She did not know how or when, but she felt it clearly now. The story between her and the man who mocked her was far from over, and the power he thought he held was starting to slip. Even if he didn't realize it yet, days turned into weeks, and the girl slowly began to feel a change inside her. Life was still difficult, and the cafe never got easier, but she discovered a quiet strength she didn't know she had. Every time the rich man returned, his presence reminded her of the humiliation she had faced. But instead of sinking into fear or anger, she felt a resolve growing within her. She began noticing small things about herself. The way she carried trays now felt lighter, not because the trays were lighter, but because her thoughts were clearer. The long hours on her feet taught her patience, but the nights she spent learning, reading, and planning had taught her hope. She was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to prepare herself for something more. The rich man visited occasionally, and every visit was like a test she did not know she had signed up for. Sometimes he mocked gently, other times he offered small coins or comments meant to remind her of her place. but she responded with quiet dignity, never raising her voice, never showing anger. That silence, oddly enough, began to speak louder than words. At the cafe, other employees began noticing the change. The way she moved, the calm in her expression, even the subtle confidence in her voice when she took orders, it all made her stand out in a place where workers usually blended into the background. Some of the regular customers started noticing too. They admired the way she handled rude or impatient clients without losing composure. One afternoon, a young woman came into the cafe looking nervous and shy. She was there to apply for a job and seemed intimidated by the busy environment. The girl took the new applicant under her wing without anyone asking her to. She showed her how to take orders, how to carry trays without spilling, and how to speak to customers with calm authority. The new employee looked at her with gratitude and quiet awe. Helping someone else made the girl realize something important. She had value beyond what anyone could mock or belittle. The rich man's laughter, his coins, his jokes, they could not take away her skills, her patience, her intelligence. She began to see herself not just as a poor waitress, but as a capable, resourceful woman. Meanwhile, she continued her evening classes. The small skills program she had discovered turned into a lifeline. She learned basic accounting, communication skills, and even how to manage a small business. Each lesson made her feel more empowered. She practiced at home, creating small plans, imagining a life where she would not have to rely on anyone's mercy to survive. The rich man noticed her changes. One afternoon, he asked her while she served him, "You seem different today, more sure of yourself." She smiled politely. "People change," she said softly. His expression flickered. He was not used to people responding without fear or awe. He had always assumed that his money and position would command respect. But she showed him something he had not expected, a quiet strength that could not be bought. That evening, after work, she returned to her tiny room and sat by the window, notebook open in front of her. She wrote about the events of the day, the customers, the rich man, her classes, her plans. Writing became her way to process her experiences, to turn pain into strategy, humiliation into lessons. She did not want revenge. She wanted growth. She wanted to rise without anyone having to give her permission. Her health was still fragile. Long hours and stress made her body ache, but she refused to let it stop her. She prepared simple meals, took her medicine on time, and made sure she rested when she could. Caring for herself became another form of resistance, a way of saying that she mattered. One day, she had an unexpected visitor. A man who worked at a local library had noticed her determination and quiet intelligence. He offered her a small part-time opportunity to help organize community events and teach basic reading skills to children in the neighborhood. She accepted immediately. It was not much money, but it gave her confidence and experience beyond the cafe walls. As weeks passed, her life began to expand in small ways. She made friends through the library. She grew more skilled through her classes. And she began to imagine a future that did not revolve around the rich man or the cafe. Every step, however small, was a victory. Her encounters with the rich man became less intimidating too. He still mocked sometimes, but she no longer felt crushed. She could meet his gaze without fear, respond without trembling. Each interaction reminded her of how far she had come. One evening, he asked her a question that stopped her in her tracks. "Why don't you leave this place and find something better?" She looked at him, calm but steady. "I am finding better, one step at a time." The words surprised him. He had expected submission, fear, or at least hesitation. Instead, he saw determination and clarity, something he had never seen in the people he considered beneath him that night. She returned to her small room, exhausted but proud. She sat with her notebook, reflecting on her journey. She thought about the moments of humiliation, the small victories, the quiet resilience she had discovered in herself. The girl who once felt invisible now understood that her worth was her own. No money, no mockery, no judgment from anyone could take that away. She slept that night with a sense of calm she had not known in years. Her dreams were no longer filled with fear or shame. Instead, she dreamed of possibilities, a future where she could make her own decisions, where she could rise above circumstances without losing her humanity. The rich man's laughter, once a source of pain, now served as a reminder of her growth. He had underestimated her, and in doing so, had unknowingly given her one of the most powerful lessons of her life. Strength does not come from wealth or status. It comes from perseverance, dignity, and the courage to rise above humiliation. She did not yet know how or when the larger confrontation with the rich man would come. She only knew that she was ready in ways she had never been before. The girl who had once accepted coins with shame now held her head high, carrying herself with quiet confidence that could not be shaken. Her life was still a challenge. The cafe still demanded long hours. The rich man still entered from time to time, but she was no longer the same girl. She had found her voice, her strength, and her plan. The journey was far from over, but she now walked it with purpose, resilience, and an unshakable belief in her own worth. Every small choice she made, every class she attended, every moment of self-respect became another brick in the foundation of a future where she would finally have the last word. Weeks passed, and life at the cafe continued in its usual rhythm. But something had changed. The girl was no longer simply surviving each day. She was thriving in ways invisible to most people. Her posture was straighter, her voice more confident, her steps lighter even under the weight of long shifts. Every table she served, every customer interaction, became a quiet demonstration of her inner strength. She had learned to navigate humiliation without letting it define her. The rich man returned one busy afternoon, his arrival announcing itself with his characteristic laughter. This time, however, she did not feel the usual tightening in her chest. She had grown accustomed to his presence, had learned to separate his actions from her self-worth. She approached his table calmly, not with fear, but with controlled composure. He smirked, leaning back in his chair. "You still here?" he asked, his voice carrying amusement and condescension. "I would have thought by now someone like you would be gone." She met his gaze steadily, not with anger, but with measured confidence. "I'm still here," she replied simply. "Doing what I need to do?" His eyes narrowed slightly, the first hint that she had caught his attention in a way that unsettled him. He had always assumed that wealth and power ensured control, but she showed him that dignity and patience could also command respect. He ordered his usual expensive items, his tone casual, but there was an undercurrent of curiosity now. He watched her move with a keen interest, noting her efficiency, her composure, the subtle authority in her movements. He could no longer mock her carelessly. Her silence now spoke volumes. The cafe felt different that day. Other staff noticed it too. The quiet confidence the girl carried seemed to radiate outward, touching even the regular customers. A few of them offered polite smiles, a nod, a small word of encouragement. It was as if her transformation was visible, tangible, making the space feel warmer despite the usual hustle and noise. After serving him, she returned to the kitchen and allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Her hands trembled just slightly, but it was no longer fear. It was the quiet acknowledgement of progress, satisfaction of handling a challenge without letting it consume her. Later, she found herself reflecting on the past weeks. Her evening classes had progressed well. She was learning more than she had ever imagined, gaining skills and confidence that expanded her sense of possibility. Each lesson, each small success, built a foundation for her future that no one could take away. She learned that growth was a quiet but powerful form of revenge, not in the sense of hurting someone else, but in proving to herself that she was capable, resilient, and valuable. Her involvement with the community library continued as well. Working with children, helping them learn, and organizing small events brought her joy she hadn't known in years. It reminded her that her worth was not tied to anyone's opinion or wealth. She had the ability to shape her life and influence others positively. The rich man visited again after a few days. This time, he brought a friend with him. The girl approached the table, her movements calm and professional. She greeted them politely, took their orders efficiently, and maintained her composure as they made small jabs, each comment carefully measured to provoke a reaction, but she remained unaffected. He watched her closely, his amusement replaced by a subtle sense of curiosity and perhaps a trace of respect he did not want to acknowledge. She was no longer the girl who would accept his small coins with embarrassment. She was now someone who understood her own value, and he could see it, even if he did not want to admit it. After he left, a colleague whispered to her, "You handled them well. They didn't faze you at all." She smiled quietly, acknowledging the comment without arrogance. It was true. She had learned that true strength was in control, in calmness, in the ability to act without being controlled by emotions. That evening, she returned to her small room, notebook open before her. She wrote down the events of the day, reflecting on her reactions, her growth, the subtle shifts in the power dynamics she had once feared. Writing had become her way to process life, to understand it, and to plan her next steps with clarity. She began to realize that the rich man's repeated visits had unintentionally helped her. Each time he mocked, each time he assumed superiority, he had given her an opportunity to practice patience, resilience, and strategic thinking. Every encounter was a lesson she was turning into strength. She felt a sense of empowerment she had never experienced before. Her confidence extended beyond the cafe. She began speaking more clearly in her classes, asking questions, participating in discussions. She started taking on small responsibilities at the library, organizing activities and leading children in learning exercises. Each small action reinforced her belief that she was capable of more than she had allowed herself to believe. One evening, as she walked home from her class, she saw the rich man outside a nearby building, speaking to someone. He noticed her and smiled. This time, the smile did not carry mockery. It was a measured acknowledgement, as if he recognized, perhaps unconsciously, that she was no longer the same person he had once tried to belittle. "You're persistent," he said as she passed by. She nodded politely. "So are you," he chuckled softly, a sound without malice. It was different from his usual laughter, lighter, less confident. She did not linger. She walked on, feeling a quiet triumph. She had not spoken to him with anger or pride, but with calm clarity. She had not sought revenge. She had asserted herself through presence, dignity, and action. Her nights were filled with planning and reflection. She considered the life she wanted to build, the skills she wanted to acquire, the independence she desired, the dignity she would never compromise. Each thought strengthened her resolve. Each small victory, whether it was a successful lesson, a positive encounter at the cafe, or an acknowledgement from someone she respected, became a stepping stone. Even her body, exhausted from work and study, seemed to carry a new energy. Her movements were deliberate, controlled, confident. Every tray she carried, every step she took, every word she spoke became a testament to her journey. She knew the rich man would continue to appear. She knew the challenges would not end, but she had learned to face them without fear. She had discovered that power was not solely in wealth or status, but in resilience, dignity, and the quiet confidence to act according to one's own values. The girl who had once felt invisible in the crowded cafe was no longer so. She had become a presence, someone who commanded attention not through arrogance, but through her composure and quiet strength. Her journey was far from complete, but she now walked it with purpose, clarity, and an understanding that the last word was not in coins or laughter. It was in her own growth and self-respect. And as she closed her notebook that night, she knew deep inside that the turning point was near. The rich man's assumptions of superiority were slipping, and the girl who had once been mocked was preparing for a moment when her dignity and strength would speak, louder than anyone's laughter. The girl woke that morning with a sense of calm determination she had never felt before. The weeks of struggle, learning, and quiet preparation had built her into someone stronger than she had ever imagined. She knew that today could change the balance between her and the rich man who had once mocked her. She did not know exactly how, but she felt ready. At the cafe, the usual buzz surrounded her. Customers came and went, employees moved swiftly, and the clatter of plates filled the air. She moved among them with steady hands and a composed heart. Every action she took was deliberate, measured, controlled. The rich man entered later than usual, dressed in his usual crisp attire, carrying himself with casual arrogance. This time, however, she did not feel the old tightness in her chest. She had faced him before and had grown beyond the humiliation he tried to impose. She approached his table calmly, taking his order with precise attention. But her eyes met his in a way that held quiet confidence. He noticed immediately, his smirk faltering just slightly. "You're looking different today," he said, curiosity threading through his words. She smiled gently. "I've been learning," she replied simply, "about myself, about life." His laughter, which had always carried a hint of mockery, was softer this time. "Learning, huh?" "From all this?" he said, gesturing vaguely to the cafe. "Yes," she said, "even from this." He paused, surprised at the calm authority in her voice. It was the first time he felt that his usual methods, mockery, coins, condescension, no longer controlled the situation. He was accustomed to people reacting with fear, shame, or forced smiles. She had none of that. Her composure was a shield he could not pierce. The cafe was busy, yet in that moment, the attention seemed to center on them. The other staff watched quietly, sensing a change. Even the customers seemed to notice, some whispering to each other. Observing how she handled the situation with dignity and calm, the rich man leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "I see you've changed," he said. "You've learned to survive better, perhaps." She shook her head slightly. "I've learned to respect myself," she said. Survival was never enough. His eyes narrowed. He had underestimated her all along. Wealth and status had once made him believe he could control others. But here was a girl who had built power through patience, learning, and self-respect. She was not weak. She was strong. Over the next hour, the exchange continued. He made small comments, trying to provoke a reaction. But she responded only with measured politeness, clear efficiency, and quiet confidence. Each interaction subtly shifted the power dynamics. He had to acknowledge, if only internally, that she was no longer beneath him. She held her dignity without arrogance, her strength without aggression. After he left, a senior employee whispered to her, "You didn't just survive today. You made him respect you." She smiled softly. "Respect isn't given by people like him. It's earned within." That evening, she returned to her small room, exhausted but fulfilled. She opened her notebook and wrote. She wrote about the day, the shift in their interaction, and the realization that her strength had always been within her. The humiliation, the coins, the mocking words they had, all been opportunities to grow, to build resilience. As she wrote, she reflected on the journey she had taken. She remembered the nights she had cried in silence, the long hours at the cafe, the quiet victories in her evening classes, the joy of teaching children at the library. Every experience had contributed to her growth. Every insult had been transformed into lessons of patience and strength. Days passed, and her life continued to improve in small but meaningful ways. She completed her skills program, gaining knowledge and confidence that extended far beyond the cafe. She found small opportunities in the community to apply what she had learned. Each success, however minor, reinforced her belief in her own ability to shape her destiny. The rich man's visits became less frequent, but each one still carried the potential for tension. He had started to notice that she moved through life with purpose, that she no longer flinched at his words, that she commanded respect through her composure and actions. It was a lesson for him, one he did not openly admit but could not ignore. One evening, she encountered him outside the cafe. He paused as she walked by. "You've truly changed," he said. She smiled. "Yes, and I'm still learning." He studied her quietly, perhaps realizing for the first time that her life was no longer shaped by him or anyone else. She had discovered her own power and her own path. Her personal life also began to blossom. She found joy in simple moments. A cup of tea after work, successful class at the library, a kind word from someone who saw her effort. She understood that dignity, patience, and hard work were not just tools for survival, they were tools for creating a meaningful, self-respected life. The girl who had once accepted small coins in public, mockery, now walked through life with quiet authority. She had discovered that the last word was not a confrontation, a shout, or revenge. It was her own resilience, her own growth, her refusal to be diminished by anyone else's perception. Months later, she stood near the cafe's entrance, looking at the busy street. She thought about the rich man, about the challenges, about the long journey she had endured. She smiled softly, not with pride or arrogance, but with satisfaction. She had transformed her pain into strength, her humiliation into lessons, her fear into resolve. And somewhere in that city, the rich man likely realized that the girl he once mocked was no longer the same. She had the last word not in coins, not in words, not in status, but in something far greater: self-respect, dignity, and the courage to rise above anyone's attempt to diminish her. Her journey was far from over, but she now walked it with purpose, clarity, and quiet power. She had discovered the truth: the strongest victories are the ones no one can see but yourself. And in that knowledge, she finally felt free, unstoppable, complete. Months after the events that had changed her life, the girl stood at the threshold of something she had only dreamed of before. Her journey from humiliation to empowerment had been long and quiet, filled with small victories, hard lessons, and personal growth. The cafe still existed, still demanded long hours, and the rich man still came occasionally, but everything had shifted. She had changed, and the world around her was beginning to notice. She woke early that morning, feeling a familiar sense of calm determination. Her body was tired from work and study, but her mind was clear. She had plans, she had direction, and she carried herself with quiet authority. Each day now felt like an opportunity to build further, to grow more, to take steps toward the life she wanted at the cafe. She moved efficiently through the morning rush. Customers arrived, some polite, some impatient, but all treated her differently now. Not with awe, not with fear, but with respect. Her composure had become a natural force, one that commanded attention without demanding it. She took orders, served trays, and managed small problems with a grace that made even the manager nod in approval. The rich man entered later, her presence still noticeable, but no longer intimidating. He had learned, gradually, that she would no longer respond to mockery with submission. Today, he did not try to test her. He watched quietly as she moved among the tables, her confidence evident in every gesture. After placing his order, he caught her attention. "You've come a long way," he said, his tone quieter than usual. "I didn't expect this." She smiled softly, acknowledging the comment without arrogance. "Neither did I," she replied. "Life teaches us things we never imagined." He studied her, perhaps realizing fully, for the first time, the strength she had cultivated. It was not a strength built on confrontation or anger. It was composed of patience, learning, self-respect, and a refusal to let humiliation define her. He recognized it, and even though he did not say it aloud, she could sense it. The rest of the day continued with the usual flow, yet there was a subtle energy in the cafe. Other staff observed her interactions, noticing how customers responded differently. She was no longer just a worker. She was someone who had transformed her challenges into a quiet, undeniable power. That evening, she walked home from her class with a sense of purpose. The streets seemed less harsh, the city less indifferent. She had changed her perception of the world, and in doing so, had changed her place within it. She reflected on the months behind her, the lessons learned at the cafe, the skills gained in her evening classes, the joy of teaching at the library, and the small victories that had quietly built her confidence at her room. She sat by the window and opened her notebook. She wrote about the day, about her feelings, about the subtle acknowledgement from the rich man. Each word reinforced her awareness of how far she had come. She no longer needed anyone's approval. Her strength was her own. Every past humiliation had become a stepping stone toward empowerment, every insult a lesson in resilience. Days turned into weeks, and the girl's life continued to grow. She had begun saving carefully, using her earnings from the cafe, her classes, her community work to build a foundation for her future. She enrolled in more advanced programs, learning about business, leadership, and personal development. Her dreams, once distant and fragile, were now tangible, achievable. The rich man's visits became even less frequent, and when he did appear, he no longer carried the air of mockery. His tone was neutral, his interactions brief, as if he understood, finally, that the girl he once ridiculed was untouchable by his assumptions. He could not diminish her because she had built a life that was independent of his judgment. One day, she was invited to speak at a small community event, sharing her story of growth and perseverance. She accepted, not out of a desire for recognition, but to inspire others who might be struggling silently as she had. Standing before the audience, she shared the lessons she had learned, that dignity could not be bought or taken away, that resilience was cultivated through daily choices, and that every small act of courage built a foundation for a stronger self. The applause that followed was warm, genuine, and unlike anything she had experienced in the cafe. She felt seen, not for her appearance or her past circumstances, but for her journey, her strength, and her authenticity. It was a moment of profound satisfaction, one that confirmed that her efforts had created lasting change. That evening, she returned to her room, exhausted but fulfilled. She reflected on the transformation she had undergone. She realized that the last word she had sought was never about proving anything to the rich man or anyone else. It was about proving to herself that she could rise, that she could endure, she could create a life of dignity and self-respect. She had achieved that. She had the last word, not through confrontation, but through living fully, intentionally, and with courage. Her nights were now filled with hope and planning rather than fear or anxiety. She envisioned the life she wanted to build, a career that utilized her skills and knowledge, independence, and opportunities to give back to the community that had supported her growth. Each plan, each action, was a continuation of the quiet power she had cultivated. Months later, the rich man returned to the cafe, noticing the subtle shifts in the environment and in the girl herself. He observed how she managed everything efficiently, how customers respected her, how her presence carried authority without needing to assert it aggressively. He realized, perhaps too late, that the girl he once mocked had transformed her life entirely on her own terms. The girl continued to work at the cafe, not out of necessity alone, but because it had become a place where she honed patience, resilience, and leadership. She had transformed every challenge into an opportunity for growth. Each interaction, each day, strengthened her understanding that self-worth is cultivated internally, not granted externally. Her journey continued with steady progress. She began mentoring others, helping young women and men understand the power of perseverance, the importance of dignity, and the strength found in self-respect. Her story, once private and painful, became a beacon for others facing adversity. The rich man never mocked her again, not because she demanded it, but because she had created a life where his words could not reach her. She had achieved what she had sought, the last word, the final victory. The undeniable power of self-determination. In the quiet moments of her room, she reflected on her journey. From the nights of humiliation at the cafe to the growth of skills, confidence, and independence, she had transformed herself. She had taken every challenge, every insult, and every difficulty, and turned them into tools for empowerment. She understood now that true victory is not in revenge, it's not in wealth, not in status. True victory is in rising above, in creating a life that reflects one's values and strength. She had done that. She had the last word. And in that knowledge, she found freedom, peace, and the enduring power to shape her own destiny.